كلية الفقه الحنفي تقدم.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah. So now, today inshallah we'll be going through where Ibn Abidin mentions when there is a difference of tashih, a difference of preponderance, then we will use certain methods to be able to preponderate further one of them. So go with one of them in essence, because both have been preponderated. So which one do we then go with? So there'll be certain clues or certain methods that will be used to then give preference to one over the other. So he'll mention 10 ways that we can give preference to one over the other. He'll go through them. We will go through them, inshallah. Then after that, he will go through, we will also get through the next part of the discussion where he discusses the mafhum, the in essence a contrapositive or a inference that is used from certain texts. So we'll go through different types of this first. We'll mention the different types that have been mentioned by the fuqaha, by Ibn Abidin as well, and then we'll also mention the ruling of the types, meaning what is the ruling for them. Can they be used? Can they not be used for evidence? Like this, we'll go through that. Maybe we'll try to give one or two examples of this. Ibn Abidin then goes through a little bit of a pedantic discussion against what some fuqaha have mentioned in their texts, but it's not really too concerning in terms of it's not in relation to the usul al-ifta. So we'll just quickly get through that all. Then Ibn Abidin will mention also where we looked at obviously the mafhum, where the contrapositive is, but we'll also look at where the opposite of the mafhum, which is the sarih, the clear text, where there is a clear text. So that obviously clear text will get preference over the implicit way of what we understood something. So there's a text which implies something, but there's a text which clearly mentions something. So obviously the text which clearly mentions something, which will be given preference to over what implicitly is being mentioned, or an implied meaning is being taken. So that he will cover right at the end, and inshallah we'll discuss that too. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So now we move on to the next part of Ibn Abidin's poem, where he goes through 10 reasons for why preponderance takes place when there is a difference of preponderance. So you'll have a difference of preponderance. We've talked about that previously. What does the mufti do in essence? So now, how do you work out where to give fatwa? This is what he is now giving us a clue towards, that if you find these particular, signs or these things that have applied, that he's going to mention 10 different things that apply, then you give preponderance to that side. So he says, وَإِن تَجِدْ تَصْحِيحَ قَوْلَيْنِ وَرَدْ, if you find the preponderance of two opinions which has come about, فَاخْتَرْ لِمَا شِئْتَ فَكُلٌّ مُعْتَمَدْ, then choose whatever you wish, everything is relied upon. So now, as he will describe later, this isn't he's made it in a statement here, but this isn't just unconditional that you can choose whichever you want blindly. There's going to be set rules to follow. That's what he then mentions. إِلَّا إِذَا كَانَ صَحِيحًا وَأَصَحْ أَوْ قِيلَ ذَا يُفْتَى بِهِ فَقَدْ رُجِّحَ. Unless, so you got a choice, because both are relied upon, he says, except unless when they both, they are sahih and asah. So when there's one of them which is sahih and the other one is the asah, then obviously generally you'll give preference to the asah one. Or it's been said that that's the one of fatwa, meaning one of the opinions have been mentioned fatwa on. So then that will be preponderated. أو كان في المتون أو قول الإمام أو ظاهر المروي أو جل العظام. Now here we have, so we already mentioned two. One is that there's a difference of sahih and asah. Second one was one of them has fatwa on there. Third one, he says that that's one of them is in the mutun, in the primers. That's number 3. Number 4, or is the qawl, the opinion of Imam Abu Hanifa. Number 5, or it's the Zahirul Marwi, meaning it's the Zahirul Riwayah, the manifest transmission. Number 5, meaning one of them is these things. Or it's Jullul Idam, is the opinion of majority of the Mashayikh. And that's number 6. قال به, they said it basically. قال به أو كان الاستحسان أو زاد للأوقاف نفعا بانا. So they said it, meaning the Mashayikh, the majority of the Mashayikh, they went with that opinion, or that it's one of them is the istihsan, meaning one of them is the juristic preference over the qiyas, or that it increases, one of them increases benefit for the endowment, for the waqf. Bana means becomes clear. So one of them makes clear the benefit of the waqf. Or number 9 now. So that was number 7, istihsan, and number 8 was the increased benefit for waqf. أو كان ذا أوفق للزمان أو كان ذا أوضح في البرهان. Number 9 is that one of them is more suited to the time, obviously in accordance to the custom, which we will talk about later on. And number 10 is one of them is stronger in proof. That's the 10. So these are the 10 ways to now decipher between these opinions, which have been preponderated. Both of them have been preponderated. So he did initially mention, like he mentioned earlier, we prayed before, that you have a choice. But what does it mean by you have a choice? You still have to go through this and work out if any of these will weigh more, will make one weigh down more, will in essence become more weightier. The preponderance of one of them will become stronger. So you have to do all of this to try to work it out. So he says all of this is done when هذا إذا تعارض التصحيح أو لم يكن أصلا به تصريح. This is when the preponderance is conflict, or there isn't at all any preponderance. فتأخذ الذي له مرجح مما علمته وهذا الأوضح. So then take the one for which there is a preponderance, meaning from one of the things that you've just found out, and this is the most clear thing. So then he goes to explain this this part of the poem. He says that I've mentioned already previously. He mentioned the signs that will give you preponderance, meaning what are the wordings that will give preponderance. So he mentioned all the detail regarding the different wordings of preponderance, fatwa alayhi amalul ummah, and all of these kind of words. He says that we mentioned all of that. Then we mentioned if there is, this is all of this works when there is a conflict in the preponderance. Because if there's no conflict of preponderance, then you just go with wherever the preponderance is, with whichever wording. Yeah, if there's different opinions mentioned, none of them have been preponderated, and only one of them has, right? And only that one mentions, for example, who is sahih, then that's it. That's the preponderance. So you go with that opinion because there is no conflict. Where we will compare with all of the knowledge that we've learned previous to this in the last lesson is when you have a conflict between preponderances. So then what do you do? And that he's saying that's what we're detailing here, that though we mentioned earlier that a mufti will have a choice, is not as simple and straight cut forward as that. So he says you have to follow these 10 principles. So the 10 principles he goes into mentioning a bit more in detail now. So he says the first one is where if one of them, I will just change the order slightly on some of them to where he's mentioning it in the way he's mentioning it. So first one, we will say that if one of them is a clear preponderance and the other is implicit preponderance. So clearly somebody mentioned هذا هو الصحيح. Now the other one is an implicit way of preponderance. So for example, they mentioned it in, they gave a reasoning for it. They gave a dalil for it. Something like that. So that doesn't matter. That's an implicit preponderance. Whereas the other one is clearly preponderated. So that's the one we generally go with. So the sarih is preferred over the iltizami, we call it a implicit preponderance. Then the second is when there is a conflict between the wording of preponderance of sahih and asah, then we will give preference to the asah over the sahih according to the most famous opinion. And we've talked about the detail of that already. Then he mentions that obviously within this you can say that if one of them is preponderated with a stronger wording, so asah is obviously stronger than sahih, generally speaking. Likewise, if one of them has the word fatwa on it, so fatwa is stronger than other wordings where there's no fatwa written on it, for example al-asah or something, so the word fatwa will be stronger. So that's the next thing that he mentions of preponderating between these two opposing opinions. Then he mentions that if there's two opposing opinions, both being preponderated, and one of them is in the matan, then now you will side with that opinion which is in the matan, because obviously, generally speaking, the matan was made to preserve the madhab, to write what the opinion of the Zahirul Riwayat was. So then we will go with that because that is implicitly already preponderated. The next one, the fourth one, he mentions that that one of them is the opinion of Imam Abu Hanifa. So there's two different preponderances. One of them is Imam Abu Hanifa's opinion. The other is, for example, Sahibain's opinion. So we go with Imam Abu Hanifa's opinion, for instance. So like, for example, in the mithl and mithlain example of where Salat al-Dhuhr ends, Asr starts, where is it? Is it one length of shadow? Is it two? So obviously Imam Abu Hanifa's opinion, because both sides are preponderated. So generally speaking, we'll give preponderance to Imam Abu Hanifa's opinion. So that's using this particular rule here. The next one he mentions, number 5, is where one of them is the manifest transmission, meaning you know that it's definitely the manifest transmission now. So the difference between this one and it being in a matan, in a primer, was that obviously if it's in the primer, then it's fine. But what if it's not in the primer, but it's still the Zahirul Riwayah? It's still the manifest transmission. So obviously that will also be given preference to. Number 6 he then mentions is if both opinions are preponderated, but majority of our mashayikh, our scholars, the jurists, are on one side, then you choose that which the majority are with. So that's number 6. Number 7, he says that if there is both preponderated, but one of them is istihsan, juristic preference, and the other one is qiyas, just simple analogy, then we will give preference generally to the istihsan over the analogy. There are some exemptions, but they are only a few, and they've been clearly mentioned where they are exemption, that here qiyas is given preference to over istihsan. So this happens sometimes, but generally speaking, the istihsan is the safer option, is the one that generally will get preference. Then number 8, he mentions that if one of them, if both are preponderated, and one of them is more more beneficial for the waqf, so it gives the waqf more benefit. So when you rule in accordance to that opinion, the waqf will, the endowment will gain more benefit. So that is the one that fatwa will generally be given on. The reason behind this, obviously, there's nobody to look after the waqf. So we should make sure that we look after the waqf, right? Because then the waqf will become, will get overlooked, and nobody to defend for the right of the waqf. That was number 8 he mentions. Number 9 he mentions is that it's more suitable to the people of this particular time. So it's more, this ruling adapts to the people more. So we go with that one because both are preponderated anyway. So we might as well go with something which suits the people of the people of that time. That was number 9, he says. Then number 10, he says that if one of them, the evidence for that is stronger. So if the evidence for one of them is stronger, then we will go for that one, okay? Because obviously the evidence for it is stronger than the other opposing one. But that obviously applies to those people who are able and capable to look into evidences and weigh up evidences like this. Now, he also, in other books we find, and later on he mentions this anyway, in other places, what we can add to this is if one of them is more beneficial for the poor. So if something is more beneficial for the poor, similar concept to, you know, when something is more beneficial for the waqf. So we're looking after the fuqara, the poor people, because again, there's nobody to defend for them. So, like for example, in zakat, in the chapter of zakat, we'll give the fatwa based on certain things which will benefit the poor people more. But that's obviously if there's a conflict in preponderance. So both are preponderated opinions. So we'll give the fatwa on that opinion, which is more beneficial for the poor. Likewise, we add that in the chapter of penal penalties, where we have the punishments, capital punishments of hudud, there we will give fatwa based on the opinion which removes the had penalty, because there's an overarching rule when it comes to all of the hudud that we try to idra'ul hudud mastata'tum, that as much as you can, we try to ward off the had. And lastly, if there is a conflict between halal and haram, then obviously the hurmat, the haram will be given preference to. So all of this being mentioned, these are all different preponderances or different ways to preponderate. We talked about the different ways to preponderate between the opinions where there is a difference of preponderance. But what we also have to remember that in a practical sense, Mufti Taqi mentions that in a practical sense, it's not as a simple clear-cut rule that if it's a matan, then that's it, or if it's zahir, then that's it. We go with it. It's not always as simple as that in practice. This is all theory we learn, but when you practice, there's obviously exemptions need to be made. You're going to find conflict and contradictions sometimes between preponderances, and it's not as simple as straightforward like go for this kind of preponderance. This requires somebody who has what we call the malaka fiqhiyya, somebody who has experience, who has developed this tafaqquh, this ability to be able to understand and comprehend much more than just theoretical knowledge. So there's much more to it. There's so many things that need to be taken into consideration in a whole picture, because sometimes the rules may say something. However, in order to, for example, saddu dhara'i, in order to close certain doors opening, which in the future may cause a lot of problems, certain rulings may need to be given, or maybe precaution needs to be adopted in this particular ruling, or there may be a public predicament in a certain ruling, which we need to apply leniency because of. So many more things that need to be taken into consideration that will only develop when a person actually spends time with somebody, a practitioner. So somebody who practices fiqh and sees how they do it in practice, live, just like with any other course that a person does, which is obviously so important. So you have just a simple example: if a person's a doctor, you've trained now, you learn all the theory, but now you have to go ahead and train under somebody, right? And you practice with somebody. Likewise, with any other field, the more you practice with somebody, you develop something which is not found in the books. You have an ability to do something now. In the same way here in fiqh, it works the same way. That person needs to develop this by being in the company of such, shuyukh, inshallah, which Allah Ta'ala grants, hopefully, people the tawfiq to be able to adopt, inshallah. Next, Ibn Abidin then goes on to the next part of the poem. He only mentions one stanza here, one part of the poem, because there's quite a lot of detail under this one. So he says, وَعْلَمْ بِمَفْهُومِ رِوَايَاتِ أَتَى مَا لَمْ يُخَالِفْ لِسَرِيهٍ ثَبَتَ. So he says that now understand that the contrapositive of the transmissions that comes, we'll take it, but it will be taken as long as it doesn't contradict a clear text which has been established. So here he now talks about the when we infer, you would say, from certain texts. So if a inference is used, a contrapositive in essence is used, can we use that as proof? So this is what he next goes into. So he says that yes, look, understand that according to our Hanafi principles, any word, we just start from the very, very basic and beginning. So any word, whatever it indicates upon, whatever it tells you, that is the mantuq of that particular wording, meaning we call it that which the wording indicates upon, that which the word tells you, okay? And anything which is derived from there, meaning it's not clearly the mantuq, but we derive from there, is called the mafhum. So meaning what is understood from that. So if, for example, I was to say that I was standing, right? So by me saying I was standing, that tells you the mantuq is that, oh, he was standing. Standing, the ruling of standing being attached to me, that is the mantuq, that is what I'm saying. That's what my wording indicates upon. It indicates to you in your picture, you will understand a certain position that I am in. So that's the mantuq. Now, what's the mafhum of that? What do you derive from that? You derive from that, okay, that means he wasn't in a sitting position or laying down position. Now you're going to derive that from this, okay? Other things you can derive as well, like you might be thinking that why was I standing, and all of the other things that you can. Mafhum is what you understand from what I said, but not directly from the wording I said. You're going to understand from there. Then the mafhum splits up into two. One is the mafhum muwafaqa, meaning the mafhum which is in accordance to what I've said. So like, for example, I said that I was standing. So what the mafhum from that is that you understand that I wasn't sitting and things like that. And then you have the mafhum al-mukhalafa. The mafhum al-mukhalafa is the contrapositive, the opposite that you understand. So this is understood from, if we give examples now, yeah? So in the Quran, Allah Ta'ala, He says, regarding parents, He says, وَلَا تَقُلْ لَهُمَا أُفْ, that do not say uff to them. So the mantuq here is that you can't say uff to your parents, right? That's the mantuq here. That's what Allah Ta'ala has said. Then the mafhum from this is that, okay, then that also means that you can't hit them, right? You can't hit them. That's a mafhum from this, because that's what's being understood, that you can't swear at them, you can't curse them, you can't hit them, you can't cause them harm. All of that is now mafhum. We're understanding that from وَلَا تَقُلْ لَهُمَا أُفْ. But Allah hasn't said that directly, but that's what we understand from that. So this is the mafhum, but this is mafhum which is muwafiq, in accordance to the uff, right? It goes in accordance to it. Then you have, like I said, the mafhum al-mukhalafa, which is the contrapositive, the opposite that you understand from this. So an example of this would be where if, for example, a person says, an example for this is like if in the hadith, Prophet ﷺ, he says, "Fil ibili sa'imati zakatun," meaning in freely grazing camels there is zakat. So freely grazing camels. So because here he mentioned freely grazing, then we understand the contrapositive of it, which is that if they're not freely grazing, the opposite of it, then there will be no zakat in them. That's what we're understanding, right? So that would be the mafhumul mukhalafa of that. Or for example, if I was to say I wasn't standing, then it will make you understand that, oh, he must have been sitting then, right? But how did you understand? I didn't say that. You understood that because you understood the opposite of what I'm saying, right? So this is called the contrapositive, the inference of my sentence in essence. So you have a mafhum which is muwafiq, in accordance to what I'm saying, right? It goes in accordance to it. So if it says don't say uff to them, that also means then don't hit them. This is muwafiq, is in accordance to one another. Whereas the contrapositive is the opposite, your understanding, right? So hopefully this is understood. Now, from there, our fuqaha then derive that the mafhum mukhalafa, which is the actual main one that we wanted to discuss, the mafhum mukhalafa then has 5 types. Okay, there are 5 types that are mentioned in amongst the mafhum mukhalafa. So, first one he mentions is the mafhum sifa. Okay, mafhum sifa. So, mafhum sifa is where you are understanding the contrapositive due to a sifa, a wasf, a description that is mentioned. And that is like the example I already gave in the hadith. Prophet he mentioned, fil iblis sa'imati zakatun. So if fil iblis sa'imati zakatun, then therefore the word sa'ima is a sifa, is a description in linguistically. If you look at it from a grammar perspective, then fil ibil as-sa'ima. So the ibil as-sa'ima is mawsuf and a sifa. So likewise over here, the sifa, it describes to us the opposite. That obviously that if it's not sa'ima, then there will be no zakat. So that we understood from the sifa. So this is called mafhumu sifa, as the name would suggest. Then we have mafhumu shart. So mafhumu shart, as the name suggests, obviously is a mafhum understood because of the shart that is mentioned, the condition mentioned. So for example, if in the Quran Allah Ta'ala he mentions, وَإِن كُنَّ أُولَاتِ حَمْلٍ فَأَنْفِقُوا عَلَيْهِنَّ حَتَّى يَضَعْنَ حَمْلَهُنَّ. That if they are pregnant, meaning if the wife that he is divorced, the husband has divorced, if the wife is pregnant, then spend on them until they give birth to their child. So you have to spend on them until the end of their pregnancy, until they give birth. So now that tells us, if we understand the condition, if they are pregnant, that tells us that if they're not pregnant, then you don't need to spend on them, right? We get that some of these rulings will not be the fatwa, but the point is that we're just trying to explain here, understand here, what is the mafhum here. So here we understood the mafhum of mafhum shart, because the shart is made that if they are pregnant, the obvious mafhum of that, the contrapositive of that, inference of that is that if they're not pregnant, then what to do here. The next one is mafhumul ghaya. Mafhumul ghaya is because there is a end point. Ghaya means end point. So if there is an end point mentioned, because of that end point, it makes us understand that that ruling won't come into play until, or it only comes into play until that ghaya. So for example, Allah Ta'ala, he mentions in the Quran, Allah Ta'ala says, فَاغْسِلُوا وُجُوهَكُمْ وَأَيْدِيَكُمْ إِلَى الْمَرَافِقِ. So you have to wash your hands up until the elbows, right? And also وَأَرْجُلَكُمْ إِلَى الْكَعْبَيْنِ, right? So, and you wash your feet, arjul, your feet, until the ankles. So now from this we understand that what's beyond the elbows in the arms and what's above the ankles on the feet is not to be washed. So when we understood that because of what the ghaya mentioned, because there was an end point, until this point you wash, it tells us that beyond that point you don't need to wash. So that is mafhum of the ghaya. Okay. Likewise, you could give another example which Ibn Abidin gives here, حَتَّى تَنْكِحَ زَوْجًا غَيْرًا, meaning if the man divorces her 3 times, فَلَا تَحِلُّ لَهُ مِنْ بَعْدُ, then she will not be halal for him anymore until she marries another husband. So until she marries another husband, that means if she doesn't marry the other husband and the halala takes place in this way, then that means she won't be halal. The wife won't be halal. So this is understood because of that ghaya mentioned. The next one he says, the mafhumul adad. Mafhumul adad, as the name again would suggest, it's because of a number. Number was mentioned and adad was mentioned. And because of that number, we understand that the ruling of anything beyond that number will be different. So for example, Allah Ta'ala says, فَجْلِدُوهُمْ ثَمَانِينَ جَلْدَةً. That if a person does a certain crime, like, accuses his wife of adultery, or accuses somebody of adultery, a chaste person, then what do? You give them 80 lashes. So now, can you give beyond 80 lashes? No, you can't. How did we understand that? Because of the number. The number 80 was mentioned. So the opposite of that, we understood that the contrapositive of that inference from there, we understood that you can't give more than the ruling would be that beyond 80, you're not allowed to. So this is the mafhumul adad because of a number mentioned. And lastly, he mentions mafhumul laqab, the mafhum because of a title, a laqab. Laqab is the actual name for something or the title given to something. So, for example, we use the same example as before. If he mentions here fil ghanami zakatun, if it was mentioned that in sheep there is zakat, so then because it's mentioned the word ghanam, sheep, that would then mean in anything else that's not sheep would not be zakat, because the word ghanam was specifically mentioned here. So if there was zakat in anything else, that laqab, the other laqab would have been used, the other name for anything else would have been used. So this is mafhooms. These are all understanding of what a mafhum mukhalifa is, in essence, a contrapositive is. Once we've understood the different types of mafhum, what's the ruling of the mafhum that we're talking about? So the first type we talked about, the mantuk is obviously everyone has to accept. But when we're talking about the mafhum, if you draw this out into a diagram, then it'd be easy. The mantuk and then the mafhum, and then the mafhum splits up into two: the mafhum al-muwafaqa, mafhum al-mukhalafa. Then the mukhalafa splits up into these 5 categories that we've done. And if you put it all down like this, it becomes easy to understand what this is all about. So if you go to the mantuk, is obvious that you're going to have to accept that. Whatever the Quran, the Hadith is saying, we accept that. So in relation to the Kitabullah and the Sunnah, the nas of Shari'a, the mantuk is taken definitely. And the mafhum, in relation to mafhum, the mafhum muwafaqa is accepted by everybody as well. So the mafhum, which is in accordance to the mafhum that's from the, in accordance to the mantuk in essence, we accept that. Like I explained, وَلَا تَقُلْ لَهُمَا أُفْ, then the mafhum muwafaqa of that is that you can't hit them. So that will be accepted by everybody as well. We accept that. That's perfectly fine. But when it comes to mafhumul mukhalafa, generally speaking, Hanafis, we don't accept mafhumul mukhalafa in nas of Sharia. So in essence, when it comes to the Kitabullah or the Sunnah, we don't accept it. The Shafi'iyya accept them all besides the last one, mafhumul laqab. So mafhumul laqab is the only one that Shafi'iyya don't accept when it comes to the nas of Sharia, but they will accept all of the other ones. So in essence, they would then say that if the camel is not sa'ima, if it's alufa, is fed fodder, it doesn't freely graze itself, then there's no zakat on that one, because the hadith mentioned fil ibilis sa'imati zakatun. So therefore, that qualification gives us a mafhum. We won't accept that. We will say no, that's not the case. We were not going to use that mafhum to derive that kind of a ruling. Likewise, any other ruling, generally speaking, they will accept that. So generally speaking, we won't accept the mafhum al-mukhalafa, the types of mafhum al-mukhalafa, all of them. So in essence, there's an ittifaq, you can say, that mafhum al-laqab won't be acceptable by us and by the Shafi'iyya and everybody else. But when it comes to all the other mafhums, we will generally not accept them too. Now, that's a general rule, as I say, because the Shafi'iyya will generally accept it, we will generally not accept it. When it comes to, again, like I said, this is all in relation to nas of Sharia. Now, obviously, there is a slight thing that Ibn Abdin mentions in his Raddul Muhtar, volume 1, page 111. He mentions there, this is in the Shamila version, so in there he mentions that the mafhum will be considered, the mafhum mukhalafa meaning, will be considered when it comes to the nusus of punishments, uqubat, punishments. So for example, we prayed that, if you lash the person, you're going to lash them 100 times. or you're going to lash them 80 times. So when the nas mentions that, you can't give more than that, or you can't give less than that even, because the mafhum prevents us doing so. Another example that he gives over there, that he mentions, that Allah Ta'ala says, Kalla innahum ar-rabbihim yawma idhil lamahjubun. That certainly these people, the kuffar, the disbelievers, on that day will be in a veil from Allah Ta'ala, meaning Allah will not unveil himself to these people. They will be, the disbelievers, they will be kept, um, what do you call it? They will be made mahroom, they will be deprived of the sight of Allah Ta'ala, of seeing Allah Ta'ala. So this is their punishment. They disbelieved in Allah, so no problem, they're not going to be able to see Allah Ta'ala. So from this, we can understand the opposite, the mafhum al-mukhalafa, that the believers then will be able to see, will be given the opportunity to see Allah Ta'ala. That means, so this is understood from the mafhum mukhalafa of this. So the point is that because a punishment is being mentioned for the disbelievers, then the opposite must be true, that the believers are going to be able to see Allah. Because then if the believers are also not seeing Allah, then what's the use, what kind of a punishment is this for the disbelievers? Because the believers aren't seeing Allah anyway, so the disbelievers not seeing Allah is not really a punishment. So in punishments, ayat of punishment, he explains that the mafhum al-mukhalafa will be acceptable. So that's just a little side point when it comes to nas of Sharia, which contains punishments. Then the mafhum al-mukhalafa, according to Hanafis, will be accepted. But like I said, on a general scale, on a general sense, when it comes to the nusus of Sharia, Kitabullah and Sunnah, we don't accept the mafhum al-mukhalafa. Okay, so that's that. But like I said, there are certain exceptions that are made. The reason why, now this is important to understand, the reason why we don't accept it is because the Sharia, the purpose of Shari', in essence, the purpose of the Kitabullah as well as the Sunnah, was not to mention some sort of ruling, meaning the purpose is not to mention fiqhi rulings. It's not that Kitabullah came down to mention fiqhi rulings, or Sunnah, Prophet ﷺ, he spoke to mention fiqhi rulings always. There were times when they would be advising people. There was maw'idha, wa'adh, nasiha. There's different ways of speaking, right? So when there is that possibility, then when they are speaking in that way, they don't necessarily mean the contrapositive may be true. So for example, where Allah Ta'ala, he says in the Quran, وَلَا تَشْتَرُوا بِآيَاتِي ثَمَنًا قَلِيلًا. Do not, purchase my, exchange of my verses a meager, small value, right? Meaning you're selling my, my ayat for what, some little gain that you're going to get. Now, does that mean, if we take the mafhum of that, that a person can sell the verses of Allah, in essence, sell the deen for a high value? Because that is thamanan qalila only. So if a person had thamanan kathira, a lot of wealth being offered in exchange, then that would then mean that you're allowed to do it, because the Quranic ayat only prohibits the thamanan qalila. So obviously we're not going to take that, because that would be obviously, that's just wrong, because that's not what Allah Ta'ala is saying here. He's saying in essence that everything is, in comparison to Allah Ta'ala's verses, everything is meager, everything is of little value. Likewise, if we see Allah Ta'ala says, وَلَا لَا تَأْكُلُوا الرِّبَا أَضْعَافًا مُضَاعَفًا. Don't, deal in interest, don't eat interest, usury. أَضْعَافًا مُضَاعَفًا means in a lot of multitudes, like you are making it in, multiplying it a lot. So if a person doesn't do it أضعافا مضاعفة, person doesn't do it so much, multiplying, he just does a little bit of interest, a little bit, so then it doesn't violate the verse then. But obviously that would be, again, a person can understand that that's not what's being meant over here. All of the interest is haram. So this is the point, that the Kitabullah, the Sunnah, was not coined. The purpose wasn't to mention fiqh rulings always. So that's the reason why you can't take the contrapositive. But when it comes to now the nas of madhab, meaning we go to the fiqhi sources, because their purpose was to write fiqh, generally speaking, we will accept the mafhum mukhalafa of the fiqhi sources. So if the author writes something, then the contrapositive of it will be acceptable, generally speaking. So, for instance, Ibn Abidin gives a few examples of this. So he mentions in the chapter of the violations of Hajj, Ihram. So if it says that when a person, he was attacked by a predatory animal, and in a state of Ihram, they killed this predatory animal, then there's nothing due on the person. Now, that ruling, where did we get it from? So we got this ruling from a statement of Umar Khattab radiallahu anhu. So the statements of Sahaba are also, mafhum is acceptable in them statements of Sahaba. It's only the Kitabullah and the statements of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the ahadith of Prophet sallallahu himself, that are not acceptable, mafhum is not acceptable in. So here we have a statement of Umar Khattab radiallahu anhu, or an action of Umar Khattab, where he killed a predatory animal and then he gave in lieu of it a ram. So he gave a ram as a penalty. So he was asked about. So he said that we initiated it, meaning I initiated the attack and I killed the predator animal myself. So now that gave us a illah. We derived a ruling from this, that means if a person did not initiate it and a predator animal initiated, then there would be nothing due on the person. So we're using the mafhum of what Umar Khattab mentioned, the contrapositive of it, and we're deriving a ruling from this. So this is an example of how we have used contrapositive to derive a ruling in the madhab. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, Alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salamu ala Rasulillah. So just to summarize what we've done today, we went through the 10 different ways that Ibn Abidin gives the preponderance. So he mentioned when there is something which is clear over that which is not clear, definitely the sarih will get preference over the ghayr the iltizami, the implicit way of giving preponderance. Then we also understood that if there is a stronger wording of preponderance, like asah over sahih, or like fatwa used on one side, that will get preference. Then what's mentioned in the mutun will get preference. Then that which is the Imam Sahib's opinion will get preference. That which is the manifest transmission will generally get preference. Or that which is the opinion of majority of the mashayikh will get preference. Likewise, the istihsan will get preference over qiyas. And likewise, something which will give more benefit to the waqf will get preference. Something which is more suitable to the people of the time will get preference. Likewise, that which is stronger in evidence will get preference. Then added a few, that which is more beneficial to the fuqara, the poor people, that will then get preference also. And the hurmat will get preference over the hillat, the permissibility. And in hudud, we will try to take away the had as much as possible. Idra'ul hudud mastata'tum concept, yes? And we understood all of that. But in summary, all of this really can only be worked out when there is a fiqhi malaka that a person needs to derive, and a person needs to develop, should we say, by being around the company of a person who has this ability. So you see them in action, in essence. Then we went on to mafhum. We went into the discussion of mafhum. We went through the breakdown of all the mafhum. We understood that in the mafhum al-mukhalafa, not the mafhum al-muwafaqa. Muwafaqa is acceptable according to everybody, according to Hanafis as well as according to other schools, even in the nas of Shari'a. But when it comes to mafhum al-mukhalafa, there's a difference of opinion now. So generally, we won't accept any of them. Generally, the Shawafi will accept all of them besides the last one, mafhum al-laqab. So we only use the Shafi'iyah to give us a bit of a contrast to understand why we're accepting and they are not why we're not accepting, should I say, and they are accepting. So we said that in the nas of Shari'a, there is other reasons of why Shariat speaks, due to other hikam, and then you can't use that contrapositive because that wasn't the purpose of Sharia when they're mentioning this. But when it comes to the nas of the madhab, meaning the fiqhi texts, we will use the mafhums, generally speaking, of them fiqhi texts, unless there is a clear text contrary to that. Then obviously you can't use the contrapositive to give you something when there is a clear text opposing that. And then when we understood that in fiqh text we accept it, we also understood that that also means um, the what's been understood by the aqwal of of the Sahaba radiallahu anhum, the statements of the Sahaba. In there, we'll also accept the contrapositive, but that's only in those. Just to add to that, only in those statements of the Sahaba which can be understood through intellect, meaning they are logical. Because illogical statements of Sahaba are like khabar, marfu is like hukm, is that it's like a marfu hadith because they must have heard that from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That's the only reason they're saying that. So then again, that goes into, because it's a marfu hadith, then you can't then take the mafhum of that, because that is taking the mafhum of then Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So that is the essence of the mafhum discussion, the remit of mafhum. We did one or two examples as well. So hopefully that should have explained the entire discussion